Hi, good evening. My name is Ifat. I work with the World Jewish Congress here in New York in our headquarters. And I just want to welcome you all here tonight before we start with our official program. Quentin from A Wider Bridge, who is partnering with us in this event, just wanted to give you a very quick background about the organizations. If the World Jewish Congress is a representative body of Jewish communities worldwide. Our headquarters are here in New York, but we have offices around the world in Israel, in Brussels, in Geneva, in Buenos Aires, and we work with different Jewish communities, over 100 Jewish communities, representing them on the local level, political level, and internationally as well. And we're very happy to partner with A Wider Bridge. This partnership came about through one of our what we call our Jewish diplomats. It's our volunteer advocates program, the Jewish Diplomatic Corps, Asaf Weiss. So I thank you for bringing us together. And we really see this as an event, a beginning of a conversation on this issue in the wider community, in the wider Jewish community as well. So thank you very much for coming. And if you want to check out our programs and our other activities, you're welcome to visit our website, and you're welcome to contact us if you need.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Quentin Hill, and I'm the Northeast Manager of A Wider Bridge. I wanted to also thank some of our other notables in the room. We have our New York City Metro Council Chair, Barry Blecker, with us tonight, Asaf Weiss, Maya Horowitz, and James McDonald, who also serve on our New York City Metro Council. So Wider Bridge is the LGBT pro-Israel organization that's working to advance equality in Israel and equality for Israel. So I just want to say a brief thing about what each of those pieces mean. So the equality in Israel is we partner with Israel's LGBTQ community to give them the tools, resources, and platforms that they need to advance full LGBT equality in their state. And then equality for Israel is having conversations like this, where we're engaging with broader communities in the broader North American LGBT community on issues relating to Israel. So this event tonight is really important to us after our experiences at the Chicago Dyke March this past summer and creating change in January 2016. So we are very honored to be here tonight and be a part of this program. So thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoy it.
Thanks very much. Welcome to LGBTQ and Z, a conversation about pride, Zionism, and inclusivity. I am Mark Joseph Stern. I'm a writer for Slate and a friend of many in the crowd, and I will be moderating tonight's panel in just a bit. So I'd also like to thank the World Jewish Congress, President Ronald S. Lauder, and A Wider Bridge's Board of Directors for making all of this possible. Thank you. So we're here tonight to talk about a problem in the LGBTQ community, the growing marginalization of Jews in LGBTQ spaces. The exclusion of Zionism and LGBTQ activists from the discourse is widespread and an ongoing phenomenon. It is an incredibly charged topic, as I think we all know and have experienced personally, and it's a topic that many people shy away from. But if we want to change the problem, then we have to bring it to the table, and we have to bring it into public consciousness. And thanks to the World Jewish Congress and A Wider Bridge, that is exactly what we will be doing tonight. Now, many of you are likely familiar with the expulsion of several Jewish demonstrators at this summer's Chicago Dyke March, as well as the outwardly anti-Semitic protest at Creating Change in 2016, which shut down a presentation by A Wider Bridge. Unfortunately, these incidents were not anomalies. They are indicative of a broader hostility toward Jews and Israel that has sadly infected a pocket of the American LGBTQ community. Now, these individuals do not speak for their broader community, but all too often they are the loudest voices in the room, drowning out those of us who would promote pluralism and inclusivity. Tonight we're going to discuss how this problem came to be and how we can ensure that the LGBTQ community remains a safe and open space for Jews and Zionists. We'll hear from 3 experts on the front line of this debate. Nadia Al-Noor, a Muslim pro-Israel campus activist, Ty Gregory, Deputy Director of A Wider Bridge and soon-to-be Executive Director in January, and Asaf Weiss, former Senior Advisor to Israel's Minister of Health and a member of the Jewish World Congress Jewish Diplomatic Corps. But first, I am delighted to introduce our keynote speaker tonight, Matt Nosanchuk. Matt served as the Obama administration's liaison to the Jewish community for nearly 3 years, drawing praise for his work across the political spectrum. He has served in 2 different roles at the Department of Justice, most recently in the Civil Rights Division, where he oversaw the implementation of the federal anti-LGBTQ hate crimes law. He's also led a division of the Office of General Counsel at the Department of Homeland Security and worked on the House Judiciary Committee minority staff. In his fleeting spare time, Matt teaches a class on LGBTQ law at Georgetown University Law Center, which, as a student, I was lucky enough to take. Matt, welcome.
Good evening. Thank you, Mark, for the introduction. It was, let's see, maybe how's that? Can you hear me now? So thank you for the introduction. Thanks to Ifat and Barak Cheney for inviting me to participate tonight. Thank you, Asaf, also, to both of you, and to A Wider Bridge and the World Jewish Congress for pulling this event together. Thank you, Ty, for the work that you do. I have had the opportunity to work closely with both organizations, the World Jewish Congress, when I was at the White House and had a chance to get to know Ronald Lauder and Robert Singer and the World Jewish Congress team. And when they brought delegations to Washington, I had the opportunity to host them. And then Wider Bridge, I had the opportunity to travel to Israel with Ty on the JFNA LGBTQ mission in June of 2016. And it's really a pleasure to be here. And Mark, as he's pointed out, was my student. This was the instance, when professors say they learn from their students. Well, this is actually true. Mark knew and knows more than me. And having a student who writes for Slate Magazine and who writes about legal issues in the Supreme Court and LGBT issues was an incredible asset to have in class. And there were many occasions when Mark was able to inform both myself and the co-professor and all of our students about a lot of issues. And so it's an honor to be introduced by you today. So what I wanted to talk about, when I think about LGBTQ issues and Zionism and Judaism, it brings up concepts of, identity, right? And we live today in a world where identity is exceedingly complicated. Identity is never monochromatic, and we all assimilate different identities into our beings. And I don't know, think about all the identities each of you encompass within yourselves. Some of those aspects of our identities are things that we can change, and others are fixed. So when I think about my identity, I think about the fact that I'm Canadian-born, I'm a native Detroiter, I'm a Michigander, I'm a Detroit sports fan, I'm a Democrat, progressive and a liberal, I'm a Stanford alum, a metrosexual, a lawyer, a Jew. I was raised as a humanistic Jew, but eventually became a Reconstructionist Jew. I'm a Zionist. I'm an Obama administration appointee. Remember him? I'm a father. I was married before I came out and have a son who's a college sophomore, and I'm a gay man. So, each of you could probably generate a similar list for yourselves. And of course, in academic and political discourse, there's an entire field that has arisen, that focuses on intersectionality. So for me, though, I'm going to move this, and then I'm going to put this down because For me, my identity as a Zionist and as a Jew and a member of the LGBT community, have been intersecting and overlapping since I came out. As I referred earlier to my Jewish identity, I was born grew up in a humanistic congregation, which actually was founded in suburban Detroit, which is where I live, by a rabbi who had been a Reform rabbi, but ultimately he didn't believe in God, and so he founded a congregation and a strain of Judaism that focused on cultural aspects of Judaism without the religion. And then when I was in college, I went for my junior year abroad to Israel, because Stanford had an overseas program there. And while in Israel, I remember reading, actually, relevant to the topic tonight, anthology of essays about Zionism called The Zionist Idea, right? And it had all of these different authors who wrote about their conception of Zionism, radically different conceptions. And one of those authors was Mordecai Kaplan, who wrote about Judaism as a civilization and how, Jews living in the diaspora could sustain, vibrant, rich, connected Jewish lives. And I thought, that's me. And so I kind of filed away in the back of my head that I wanted to learn about Reconstructionism, and that's what I did, and ultimately joined and still belong to a Reconstructionist congregation in suburban Maryland. As far as the gay part goes, I came out later in life, and I was thinking about that and about the challenges that we each face as Jews in coming out within our community. And coming out, of course, requires courage for every person. And in the Jewish community, I'm sure all of us have very different experiences of what it was like to come out. And if you're affiliated with some parts of the community, it's a act that's greeted with acceptance or compassion, and in other parts of the community, it can be deemed, an act of defiance or betrayal and lead to all kinds of ostracization, disowning, and other, terrible consequences. But in, the part of the Jewish community that I lived, it was welcomed. And after coming out, the first big trip that I took was the first ever Jewish Federation-sponsored trip to Israel, a much smaller trip than the one I took with Ty in 2016. This was in 2005. And, I was part of a group of American LGBTQ Jews who traveled to Israel and found that, upon arriving and visiting, Tel Aviv for the first time as openly gay man, that this was a place that was, incredibly accepting to LGBT identity. And of course, that was a time when the state of LGBT rights in this country was at a very different point than it was when we went in, 2016. I mean, it felt like it was in many ways, easier to be openly LGBTQ in Israel than it was in the U.S. in 2005. Coming out as LGBTQ in the Jewish community, we each face our own, challenges in doing so. So my coming out and work that I had done on civil rights related to LGBTQ rights and relationship recognition in the mid-2000s, and work I did early on in my career on AIDS and civil liberties and gay and lesbian rights in the early 1990s. All of that work led me to my position in the Obama administration, where I ended up being appointed, as Mark said, to work on LGBTQ issues in the Department of Justice. I was kind of the appointee in the front office working for then Assistant Attorney General Tom Perez on the LGBTQ portfolio. And, shockingly, there had been no one in that job in the Bush administration. The job did not exist in the Bush administration. So I basically, was able to go in there at a time when we had just elected a president who had a very ambitious agenda on LGBTQ rights, and I was incredibly fortunate to be a part of that. One friend of mine, though, remarked when I told him that, he said, "Oh yeah, you really played your cards well in coming out, because I landed this great appointment in the Obama administration." I'm like, yeah, that's exactly why I did it. But at the Department of Justice, I was deeply involved in work to repeal the exclusion of gay men and lesbians from the military, the don't ask, don't tell policy. And at the time, in advocating for the repeal of don't ask, don't tell, we were able to point to examples of other nations in the world that accepted gays and lesbians into their ranks with no drop in efficiency or no drop in morale. And of course, Israel was one of the chief examples. And I had the opportunity then to engage with the Embassy of Israel, and they provided me with information that we could share within the U.S. government and within the discussion about repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the very vibrant discussion that occurred before the repeal actually happened. And it was all of that engaging with stakeholders, whether it was the Embassy of Israel or people at HRC or Lambda Legal or other LGBT organizations or LGBTQ communities throughout the country, that led me to be on the radar of the White House when they reached out to me and said, we want you to come to the White House, not to do LGBTQ issues, but to be the president's liaison to the American Jewish community. It was very out of the blue request for me, but I decided that when presented with an opportunity to work in the White House, at least when President Obama was there, it was an opportunity that I did not want to turn down. And so it really was because of my LGBTQ identity that I ended up as a Jewish liaison, because I never would have been on their radar otherwise. And what was really affirming about my experience in the Obama administration is that I got to work, both on LGBTQ issues and, on issues of importance to the Jewish community. So these two parts of my identity that are go to the core of who I am. And, how many people get to work in a senior position in government and can say that? So I really value and treasure that experience that I had. And at the time that I was appointed to the role, the White House was comfortable with this intersection of my identity as someone who is openly gay, and Jewish, because, we haven't always found as LGBTQ individuals that, the Jewish community was the most affirming place for our identities. But to the credit of the American Jewish community and its leadership, when I was appointed, people were very accepting of me, from, the Reform Jewish community through the Orthodox Jewish community, even if, though their particular religious beliefs and some Orthodox communities was not as welcoming of me, on a personal level. They were very willing to work with me on a professional level. And other than one article that said, a homosexual activist has become the White House Jewish liaison for President Obama, everything was really positive. So, I, working in the Obama administration as openly gay Jew and the president's liaison to the Jewish community, I really felt that I was part of a team that included many like-minded folks from different backgrounds who had different intersecting and overlapping identities themselves, ethnic or racial or religious diversity, which there was a lot of. There was even national diversity, as more than a few of us were born in Canada who worked in the Obama administration, which I found out when Justin Trudeau came and we all showed up on the White House lawn to see him and the president. That embrace of individuals with a diversity of backgrounds and identities was not an accident, but it was really an expression of the values and identity of our president. And of course, President Obama, in his own case, had struggled, early in his life with how to reconcile aspects of his own identity, growing up with a white mother and a, African father. So, working as the Jewish liaison in the White House in the Obama administration, I felt there was no competition within the administration when it came to my Jewish and LGBT identities. And in fact, on the domestic front, leading voices and organizations in the Jewish community were at the forefront of efforts to support the pro-LGBTQ policies of the administration. The Anti-Defamation League championed the passage of the Matthew Shepard Jamesburg Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, which is the first federal law to offer nationwide protection to people who are violently attacked because of their actual or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity. The Religious Action Center for Reform Judaism was a leading voice in supporting President Obama's adoption of an executive order that bans discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity in federal contracting. An executive order, incidentally, that still remains on the books, at least today, fortunately. And numerous Jewish organizations, of course, backed the administration's challenge to the Federal Defense of Marriage Act, which ultimately culminated in the administration's support for the challenge that was brought by the late LGBTQ Jewish icon Edie Windsor, which led to the declaration that the Federal Defense of Marriage Act is unconstitutional. And I can remember the incredible affirmation that I felt as openly gay Jew when I got to accompany Vice President Biden to the URJ, Union of Reformed Judaism Biennial in Orlando in late 2015. After a day spent riding roller coasters at Disney World with the Vice President, which is another story for another time, we went to the biennial and he spoke and he praised the Reformed community for adopting several resolutions that supported transgender individuals, which was a really big aspect of their conference, and they were really proud of it because their affirmation tracked advancements in policies that had occurred for transgender people within the administration. So it never really felt to me like my Jewish and LGBT identities were in tension until I felt this kind of gut punch when Chicago hosted the Creating Change conference in January 2016, and a wider bridge sought to hold the reception that ultimately became the focus of virulent protest. And really, I think we felt all kind of blindsided by the attack on a wider bridge in their effort to participate in creating change and to bring to the event individual LGBTQ individuals from Israel to share their experience and build those kinds of connections that a wider bridge is dedicated to promoting. So, it felt like, as I said earlier, right, coming out as LGBTQ had complications for us in the Jewish community, but now it's clear that coming out as Jewish in parts of the LGBT community can be incredibly complicated as well. And of course, this scenario has regrettably repeated itself in progressive and LGBTQ circles on college campuses, at Creating Change, and as Mark alluded to, the Chicago Dyke March during Pride last year. So, it has become completely about identity in these cases. It's like just because somebody is Jewish or because they're Israeli, we're told we don't have a place among our brothers and sisters in the LGBTQ community. And Mark, has a great piece in Slate that kind of outlines the kind of outrageous conditions that LGBTQ Jews are sort of asked to acquiesce to in order to be allowed into the progressive LGBTQ community. You can't use the Z word, or you have to renounce support for Israel or swear allegiance to the Palestinian cause. And Mark outlines these conditions, and it's quite scary. And the message is really that you can't be both LGBTQ and Jewish and Zionist. And to the extent that we identify with the Jewish community or with Israel, we're unwelcome in the LGBTQ community. And this exclusion is profoundly wrong and represents really an unacceptable politics of inclusion that I think can be encompassed within the sort of 3 Ds that have become the benchmarks for defining anti-Semitism. In fact, they're literally the benchmarks according to the definition of anti-Semitism that the State Department adopted. When it's demonization, delegitimization, or the imposition of a double standard. And when you think about these kind of conditions that are being imposed preconditions for Jewish participation in the LGBT community, it almost reminds me of the NFL telling its players that they can't kneel, right? Because a demagogue in chief has told them to enforce that. Because language is incredibly important, and we really, and it feels to me like we've allowed detractors to define the term. You know, I said earlier that I read the Zionist idea, and you look at all the different ideas about what Zionism is and how it's been thought of, you know, but it has been crudely characterized as being one thing, and only that one thing. And, you know, I think we need to try to reclaim that term, right? And so that it's not an automatic trigger that it has become today, you know, in so many parts of the progressive community, unfortunately. So, you know, the effort to tell us that our Jewish identity is somehow inconsistent with the history of discrimination or marginalization, you know, it fails to recognize either the historical or modern day reality that is Jewish identity. I mean, just look at Europe today with its resurgent anti-Semitism, or look at Charlottesville and the anti-Semitic chants that took place there, or even Cornell University just this week, where the campus awoke a few days ago to posters that read, you know, quote, "Just say no to Jewish lies," unquote. So, you know, in the same vein, not every effort to highlight the lives of LGBTQ Jews in Israel or the ways in which LGBTQ Israelis live openly there equates with, you know, pinkwashing. And pinkwashing can't be employed or invoked just to quash any such discussions and essentially render invisible the experience of being LGBTQ in Israel. So, you know, to me, the notion that some LGBTQ individuals are not welcome because of their religious identity or their support for Israel is anathema to the highest ideals of the LGBT community. And when I think about those highest ideals, you know, I think about the being in San Francisco a couple weeks ago and seeing hanging, you know, flying above Castro Street, the gigantic rainbow flag. And why is that rainbow flag, you know, ubiquitous and such a compelling symbol for the LGBT community? Because LGBTQ people are everywhere. They're every color, race, religion, ethnicity, nationality. And the LGBT community's leaders and organizations must stand strongly for the proposition that those who are in the community or are allied with the community always have a place in that community. So to me, you know, the exclusion of people because they are, you know, because the exclusion of Jews, of us, from the LGBT community is anathema to the values of that community and really negates a fundamental part of who we are as individuals. So I look forward to hearing what the panel has to say about this now, and really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you tonight. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was a beautiful, beautiful speech. I think the mic is giving us a little trouble. But while it is sorted out, I would like to invite our panel members up to chat with us. Please join me on the stage, Asaf, Ty, and Nadia. Thank you. It's really no fun if you don't have at least a little mic trouble, actually. Should I just turn it off? He's gonna fix it? All right. They're too close. All right, so do you want to pass? Yeah. Why don't you turn that one off and we'll pass this down. All right, look at that. We solved it. Thanks. All right. Matt, that really was a beautiful speech. Thank you so much. You said a lot that resonated with me and I think with a lot of people here. And I also just want to say on a personal note that as someone who has been maligned as a homosexual activist many times, I urge you to wear it as a badge of honor. It truly is. All right, so for our panel tonight, I wanted to start us off with you because we had a discussion earlier about some of these issues. You are an Israeli, you are a member of the LGBTQ community, and you are a pro-Israel activist, which I think gives you a pretty unique perspective on these issues. And when we spoke earlier, you told me that when you were studying at Columbia, students held an anti-Israel event called Good Gay, Bad Gay. talk a little bit about how these students attempted to make Jews feel unwelcome in LGBTQ spaces on campus, and what it was that sort of stood out to you most about the event.
First of all, I want to thank Wider Bridge and the World Jewish Congress for having this discussion. It's not an easy discussion to conduct in the current discourse, but I want to thank them for putting this issue on the table. It wasn't an easy, I'm just going to say a couple of words about this. It wasn't an easy topic for me personally because on the one hand, the exclusion of Jews, LGBT people is something that has to be discussed and confronted with. But on the other hand, I was afraid that we're going to frame the LGBT community as anti-Israel and as anti-Jews and anti-Semitic, and it's not the case. There are groups within the LGBT community who are anti-Semitic, who are anti-Israel, and they are the ones who are promoting this agenda. We are a member of the LGBT community as much as they are. And it's important for us to remember that because I've seen a couple of comments on our Facebook when we promoted this event, for instance, like, they're showing their true colors. And this is exactly the rhetoric that the BDS movement wants us to use. They want to place us against the LGBT community. And this is not the case. And it's important for all of us to remember that and to keep reminding ourselves every time we're talking about this. And I'm going to refer to your question now. Last year, I had a chance to experience firsthand everything that I've heard of as an Israeli about what's going on in American campuses with the BDS activities. And the specific event that you mentioned touched me in a personal note, because on the one hand, as you said, I'm an Israeli, I'm Jew, I'm a Zionist, and I obviously object to everything that the BDS movement stands for and its tactic and strategy. But on the other hand, I'm also a gay person, a gay man, and I identify with LGBTQ suffering. Doesn't matter where it happens. Whether it happens in Israel, across the world, in Palestine, doesn't matter. So I came to that event with mixed feelings. And I have to admit that I was shocked at what I heard about in this event, because they didn't even discuss LGBTQ Palestinian suffering. Everything that was discussed was how Israel is to blame for LGBTQ Palestinian suffering. Not a word was mentioned about criminalization of Palestinian LGBTQ people within Palestine. Not a word was mentioned about prosecution, about executions, about family killing, honor killing. Not a word was mentioned about that. Everything was framed against Israel. And basically, then you understand that the agenda, that the tactic is to deflect the blame for the LGBTQ suffering within Palestine and to place the blame on Israel. Now, while I identify with LGBTQ suffering, as I said, across the world, I don't pretend to speak for the LGBTQ Palestinian community. But I will say one thing. For me, as an Israeli gay person, I experienced discrimination also in my country and from my society. And I'm active within Israel to change that and to achieve equality within Israel. And if someone would have used my suffering as an LGBTQ person within Israel and will try to shift the blame from my government or from my society, that's basically using my suffering for another agenda. And that's something that us, as an LGBTQ community, can't allow to happen.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to follow up on that, but first I wanted to ask a question of each panelist to kind of get our areas of expertise on the table. So Nadia, I want to turn to you. As a campus activist, you are truly on the front lines of this issue. So talk to us about how you've seen opponents of Israel attempt to make LGBTQ campus spaces unwelcome to pro-Israel and Jewish students.
Okay, I'm going to tell you a story about what happened when I was a senior in college. I'm a graduate student now, but I went to a school, sorry, that was about 30% Jewish, But the pro-Palestinian, or I don't even want to call them pro-Palestinian because they're not even pro-Palestinian, they're just anti-Israel and using Palestinian suffering in order to hate Israelis and Jews. So, they're anti-Israel. The anti-Israel crowd was very, very strong, even at a school that was very, very populated with Jewish students. So, but we also had, a Zionist club that was part of the Hillel, and I was part of it. So we decided, hey, we're going to bring a speaker to campus. Does anyone here know who Asi Asar is? For those who don't know, he is a gay Israeli celebrity and filmmaker, and he was going to come to campus and show his film about homophobia in a Jewish society. It's just, he was just going to do that. It wasn't going to be anything like bad. It wasn't going to be anything bad, but the LGBT group on campus decided it was unacceptable that an Israeli man was going to be allowed to speak on campus. So they basically threw a tantrum. First, they demanded that we cancel the event, and we're like, no, we're not doing that. We're not going to, cancel a speaker because of his nationality. That's called discrimination. So, we decided to bring him. Then they held this huge campaign, in the library. They put up giant posters that said, stand against pink washing, because apparently talking about gay rights in Israel is pink washing, because apparently the only reason that gay Israelis want to fight for rights is just to distract people from the Palestinian conflict, right? Because the only reason that Americans want to fight for gay rights is to distract people from the fact that there's stuff going on in Guantanamo Bay, clearly. So, that's the logic, though, behind the whole pink washing thing. It's taking, all the struggles, all the successes that the Israeli LGBT movement has dealt with and spitting on it and saying, you're not allowed to fight for your rights because there's this other thing going on. And it's honestly disgusting. But anyway, moving on. There was this whole thing that happened. They took our posters that we made for the event and wrote, "This is what pink washing looks like," all over them. This escalated really, really far. And so the, I guess, person in charge of diversity at the school wanted to set up a meeting between our group and their group, and they said, and we were on board with it, but they said, well, we don't dialogue with racists, because clearly, bringing a speaker to talk about gay rights is racism. But anyway, so here's where things got really bad. Like it was bad before, but it got really bad. The board of the LGBT group on campus had 2 Jewish students on it, out of, I think, 8 people. And these 2 Jewish students were Zionists, and they wanted to hear this man speak. And they were given a choice: denounce the speaker, denounce your Zionism, or lose your queer community. In the end, they were kicked off the board of the LGBT group, and they lost their queer community. They had to choose between being Jewish and being queer, and they chose being Jewish. And that was it. They couldn't turn back from that. And they cried. They were really upset, because they had come to this school so that they could have a queer community. And because they were asked, denounce everything else that's important to you, they just couldn't do that. So the time came where we brought the speaker, and they held a big protest, and they did their stupid chants against Israel and something pink washing. You could just fill in the blanks with all of the stupid buzzwords they use. You could basically just, it's like have you ever done Mad Libs? Just do Mad Libs with like all the SJP words. You could do it yourself. But it was like that. And then, but it got really heated and everyone was yelling to the point where the event had to be canceled early and the security guards had to escort everybody out and leave all of the Jewish students in the room alone, so that they could be escorted out safely after all the protesters were gone. And a lot of the Jewish students were afraid to go to class the next day because, God forbid they listen to a gay man talk about homophobia in a Jewish society. That's all he wanted to do. But it just wasn't allowed because something Palestine. It was disgusting, and this isn't just, one thing that happened at one campus. This is a rampant disease at many, many campuses. Like Asaf said, the LGBT community isn't anti-Semitic as a whole, but there is an anti-Semitism problem in certain parts of it. And here's the scary part. The people who are doing it think they're doing it for the good cause, so they think they're the good people in this situation. They think they're on the right side of history, and they think we're the bad guys. They don't see it as anti-Semitism. They see it as, Zionism is Nazism, Zionism is racism. How can you argue with that? How can you reason with that? And that's the state that we're at right now. And that's what we're fighting against. And that's what I see on college campuses. And it's only getting worse with every year, according to studies. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Nadia. It's so interesting and distressing to hear you talk about how anti-Israel activists have turned being Israeli into a political identity. It's not just a nationality, it's not something you are, it's some kind of highly politicized and controversial identity. And it's interesting to hear in light of Matt's address, because not so long ago, LGBTQ people were in the same position, right? And there are still parts of the country where I still can't say I'm gay without that being some highly political statement, something controversial, something I should hide. And it's devastating to hear how anti-Israel activists have turned simply being Israeli into something that's controversial. And I think in some colleges, even being Jewish, it's difficult to be openly Jewish at some colleges and some events, as we've seen, without having your identity treated as something political and controversial and shameful, something that LGBTQ people have faced so much of. So thank you for sharing that story. Ty, I want to turn to you, and you've truly been on the front lines of these issues since you were at the Wider Bridge event that was shut down in Chicago in 2016. And in your work then and now, you've personally faced accusations of pinkwashing, like Nadia and Asaf. And I want to ask, why do you think it is that the mere promotion of LGBTQ equality in Israel is sometimes dismissed as pro-Israel propaganda by ostensible supporters of LGBTQ rights?
So I think this talk for the past 30 minutes has been a little depressing for all of us. And it's going to continue to be for a little while. But what I want to say is it's a great thing that there's an organization that's addressing this problem, and I'm proud to work for it, a Wider Bridge. And one of the reasons that we wanted to partner with the WJC is that this can't be a conversation that stays inside of an LGBT Jewish space. This needs to be a conversation in the broader Jewish community, the broader pro-Israel community, and the broader LGBT community. We have to make friends, we have to build relationships, bridges, if you will. This can't be an internal conversation, and that's why we're so glad to be here with the World Jewish Congress. Raise your hand if you're familiar with this term pinkwashing. Keep your hand up if you know the history behind it. So I think that's an important place to start. This topic came up when it was discovered that certain products that were raising money for breast cancer awareness were deemed to have chemicals in them that actually cause breast cancer, like a Campbell's soup or different kind of products with chemicals that could contribute to cancer. And this term of pinkwashing came up because of the pink ribbons around breast cancer. That evolved to organizations like the NFL, who had pink uniforms, one Sunday out of the season, and people were saying, well, they're raising money for breast cancer research, but really their players are running at each other and they're getting concussions and they're committing suicide 40 years later. They're really just doing this as a good PR campaign because they get so much negative press. And from there, some anti-Israel activists said, well, maybe if corporations can pinkwash, so can countries. And that's where the concept of pinkwashing in a nationality form, in this case Israel, was born. And it's been held against LGBT activists and people who care about Israel in our community ever since. And I think that the main challenge that we have is that when we are arguing about this, it's never personal for folks. We talk about Israel as a construct, we talk about Zionism as a construct, but what we're really fighting for are people like Asaf, Israelis. They're people. And so, it's much easier in an abstract form to accept this argument of Zionism as racism. It's much harder for us to put Israelis in front of people, have them share their life stories that are so similar to ours as LGBT people, and reject that. And so our strategy at A Wider Bridge is making LGBT Israel personal for people. We bring LGBT leaders, including Nadia, from not just the Jewish community, from the Latinx community, the African American community, Christian pastors, all across the LGBT spectrum. We bring them to Israel to meet the different activists on the ground because we think that they will be inspired and inherently have a personal connection with those folks. So it's moving from the national level, the foreign policy level, and saying, before we expect someone to weigh in on the conflict, before we expect someone to have an opinion about Gaza or Iran or nuclear weapons, first they have to have a personal connection to this place, and they have to meet the people who are just like them. We think that that's where the conversation needs to start to be successful. And so when we're not doing programs like this, we bring Israeli NGOs to the US to meet their North American counterparts and to talk about their work in the community so that we can raise them resources because they need money to continue to do the great work that they're doing, but because their stories resonate so much with all of us. And many of you have been to some of those programs and understood that the work that they're doing is tangible. And there's no way they're making it up because it's the same exact fight that we have here in the US. So the message is really that we need to put Israelis first. They're the ones that need to be speaking about these issues, about their struggle for LGBT equality. And for all of us that are Americans, and you can be a Canadian and American, and I know why you wanted to meet Justin Trudeau, it's not just because you're Canadian, is because, we have a story to tell. Each one of us has a personal story to tell. Why is Israel important to us? Don't just say, I support Israel, you should support Israel too. That's just what the other side who wants you not to like it is doing. Why does Israel matter to you as an LGBT person, as a Jewish person, as an ally? We need to start with what's personal to us, because maybe Israel isn't personal to them, but if we have a relationship with these people ourselves, it's much more challenging for them to reject that notion. So we need to take a step back and put the people first and the politics second, because unless people have a framework to build the politics around, it's just not going to work. And that's where we're hoping to take the conversation.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a lot on the table now. I want to touch what's kind of a third rail in certain circles and bring up the topic of intersectionality. Intersectionality can be used for good, it can be used for evil. I think that in this area, it may more often be used for evil. But Asaf, I want you to talk a little bit about how you saw sort of the idea of intersectionality in action, what it means, and how it is applied to this concept of pinkwashing that we've discussed so much.
I think that the way that intersectionality is being used, because it's being used for a certain agenda, it's not the core concept of intersectionality. And it's being used as a way to forces you to choose identities that someone thinks that are right instead of other identities that they think that they are wrong. And we like to play with we like to say the LGBT community. We love the word community. But the fact is that we are all over the place. And the similarities between an LGBTQ person in the US to an LGBTQ person in China, in Arab countries, in Israel, in Europe, are not much alike. And we are different people, and we come from different backgrounds. And our only common denominator is our LGBTQ identity. And once we start to deflect the conversation from our LGBTQ identity, and you forces us to choose something, like Nadia, give an example, story. You forces us to choose between our LGBTQ identity to our other identities. I'm white. I'm also, my grandparents are from Libya, so I'm 50% not white, Arab. I'm a man. I'm Jewish. I'm a Zionist. I'm Israeli. As Matt said, we are a lot of things. And once you make me choose between my identities, you're doing exactly, again, you're fighting against my LGBTQ struggle, because my LGBTQ struggle is for other people to accept my identity. And that's the concept of, I think that the way that intersectionality is being used today. So if we wanna keep this concept of an LGBTQ community, we need to focus on our LGBTQ common denominator.
About intersectionality. What exactly about it? Yes. I guess people do use intersectionality, at least in this case, more for evil than for good. It's more like, you know, if you're a person of an oppressed identity, you have to stand with all peoples have oppressed identities. Okay, sounds good. Okay, so then you have to stand with Palestinians. All right, why? Because they're oppressed by Israel. You know, you take a good idea and twist it to, you know, instead of yes, let's all stand together against oppression, it's let's all stand against Israel, because why not? You know, why not stand against oppression by the Palestinian government? Nope, just Israel. You know, it's a problem. It's often used in a lot of different ways, not even just like in the LGBT community, not even just with Israel. Like I've just seen just intersectionality being used as a way to take a narrative, take something good and just, it's not so good. I don't know, I just got a problem with it. But it could be something good. You know, yes, our identities are important. We have many, many different identities, and they all play out differently for us. You know, in the LGBT community in general, I've noticed not just with, you know, Jews, but like there's some parts of the LGBT community are just resistant to accept people of faith in general. You know, I as a Muslim, a lot of queer people have called me a traitor, have called me, you know, like, how could you support something so evil? You know, all these different things, you know, so I'm rambling now because I'm really tired. I took like a 4-hour bus ride to get here. But yeah, so I think that we have to reclaim the narrative and say, yes, we do have to, you know, stand together. We do have to recognize the importance of all of our different identities and the way they intersect, but also not use that as a way to target other people, specifically Jews and Israelis and other people. Like, you can't use intersectionality as a weapon. You have to use it as a way to bring people closer, to bring people, to make them stronger, not as a way to tear people down. So, you know, we could use intersectionality to say, you know, yes, you know, I'm Jewish, I'm Israeli, I'm queer, you know, and, you know, I still matter as a person. My struggles matter as a person. You know, take it back from the people who are trying to use it to hurt you. We have to take it back. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. That was extremely coherent, despite your fatigue. I really agree with that. I think it's very powerful, and I think many of us may have read after the Dyke March incident. There was an article in the New York Times, an op-ed by Vari Weiss, who's a very good writer, but she wrote that intersectionality is sort of fundamentally, inherently bad, and that it will always be used against Jews. And I agree with you that that's not true. I don't think that's right. And I think that the Dyke March actually kind of gave an example of why it's wrong, because when intersectionality is used to oppress and discriminate against Jews, then Jews have become the oppressed whom intersectionality dictates must be supported. So it almost seems like there's a kind of illogic in the use of intersectionality as a weapon. So I'm very glad you said that. Ty, I want to turn back to you, and I want to talk a little bit about Jews who might not identify as Zionists. So far tonight, I think we've exclusively talked about Zionists, whether they're Jewish or not, and I think it's very clear what skin they have in this game. But how do we expand this conversation to Jews who might have sort of ambivalent or indifferent feelings toward Israel and toward Zionism? How do we make them care? How do we bring them into this conversation about the growing issue of LGBTQ anti-Semitism?
That's a great question. So I think we need to distinguish between two types of folks that fit into this category: the folks that reject the term Zionism and the folks that are ambivalent about Israel. We heard a little bit about that. Zionism is the original social justice movement of the Jewish people. That's it. Zionism is a social justice movement in its purest form. And we better not forget that when we're talking to our friends in progressive communities. This was a liberation movement that culminated with statehood. It took a lot of organizing across the world. It took a lot of resources. It took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, but we did it. But it didn't end at the state's beginning. And there have been a lot of different ideas about what Zionism after statehood meant. But we think that there are many different ideas about what that means to everyone here. But we shouldn't reject this term just because some people on either far end of the spectrum have chosen to define it for us. Zionism is a social justice movement and part of an inclusive intersectionality. And I think that it's important for everyone, again, to say why Zionism is important to them as a Jew, as a friend of Jews, however you identify. The second category, I think, is a really important category to consider, which is people that are ambivalent. I personally think that this is a bigger problem than the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, the delegitimization forces. I think ambivalence, especially amongst millennial Jews, is a bigger problem. And I think that we're going to have to find ways to engage them. I tell folks we can't just be against delegitimization. We have to be for something, too. The opposite of divestment is investment. And so if we want to talk about what our values are, we can't just oppose something. We can't be an anti-movement. We have to be for something. And in our solution, there are many organizations doing great investment work. Our solution is to invest our values in LGBT rights in Israel. There are 16 different Israeli LGBT NGOs that we work with that are fighting for Ethiopian LGBT visibility, religious LGBT visibility, people in Haifa, in Sderot, all over the country. We want to make sure that we are investing with our values in this community. And so we think that we need to provide, and you should provide your own, we need to provide a constructive, positive, values-driven alternative to divestment. If we're only against something, that's not a movement people are inspired by. We have to start with our values. And I think that's really how this younger generation, I'm talking about that like I'm not a part of it, we as millennials think about our involvement with causes by whether they align with our values. And we need to start talking about Israel and Zionism as aligning with our personal values.
All right, thank you so much. So I believe we've reached the point in the night when we're going to open this up to Q&A with the audience. Oh, Asaf, did you have something to add? We haven't reached that point yet. Sorry.
I wanted to say something about, to refer to something that Nadia said, that they think that they are right, and they think that they think that they are on the good side, and that we are the ones who are wrong. And I want to tell a story, and from that story, I want to offer a test to know whether you're on the right side of history or not. Yesterday, I attended with the amazing students from Students Supporting Israel who are here in the crowd from Colombia, an event that SJP and JVP has done for the LGBT community. And one of the students, Ophir, asked a question and told a story about a gay Palestinian person, a man who was executed in Gaza by the Hamas government. And she asked the students who were organizing this event what they think about it. And they couldn't bring themselves to condemn that. And we were shocked, because if you find yourself that your hatred towards Israel blinds you so much that you can't even condemn an execution of an LGBTQ person, doesn't matter who executed this person, just for being LGBTQ, then you have a problem, and you need to go back, do your homework, think what you need to do right, and start your fight again. And
Thank you. That was a necessary coda. Okay.
sorry for prolonging this.
So now we are going to be doing Q&A, and I'd like to invite Matt back up to the stage, who will be participating. I believe, how should we do this? Should we pass around the microphone or have each individual speak? Yeah, let's. All right, so we're going to bring the microphone to you, and you can pose your question. If you could pose your question to an individual on the panel, that would be great.
I will pose this question to anyone on the panel or someone in the audience who wants to jump in. Basically, in dealing with the progressive anti-Zionist people, they will always say, I'm not anti-Semitic. Some of them will even say, I'm not even really anti-Israel, I'm just anti-apartheid. But now I don't believe that all of these people are inherently anti-Semitic. I believe that there are some good people who just have had a certain exposure to a certain set of facts, and they just don't necessarily have the complete picture, and out of the goodness of their good hearts, they may actually believe that Israel is wrong in this particular instance, but they're not anti-Semitic. But I believe a lot of these people who are saying, I'm not anti-Semitic, they really are. I want your opinions on that, and how do you engage with that type of person?
I'm using my executive authority to direct this question toward Nadia first, then Matt.
I've been chosen as tribute. So I used to be an anti-Zionist, because, when I went to college, the only thing I heard was, hey, you ever hear of Israel? Yeah, they're evil. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then I guess kind of got sucked down the rabbit hole like that. And I heard the Zionism is racism, and I didn't question it because I didn't have anybody to counter that view. I heard everything, and so, all the propaganda against Israel, you start to believe it because you don't see anything different. If you heard that, I guess, I'm going to say Libya or something, some country somewhere, was doing all the things that, people say Israel do, wouldn't you hate Libya? If you didn't have any other people saying, no, Libya's, not doing all this stuff, wouldn't you hate Libya if you didn't, or China or whatever, wouldn't you feel that way? But I did notice that the more I started to hate Israel, some anti-Semitism did start seeping into there. My dad's Jewish, and I had some anti-Semitism seeping into there. I was like, oh, the Hillel gets so much money, I wonder why. All this, just anti-Semitic tropes just came into my arguments the more I became anti-Israel. And, studies show that the more anti-Zionist activity that's on campuses, the higher the anti-Semitic activity there is on campuses. It correlates. My school used to be the swastika capital of, the colleges of the United States. But we got rid of our Students for Justice in Palestine because they broke New York state law. And you know what? Now the Zionist voice is the biggest, loudest voice, and we're pretty good with the There's not much anti-Semitism on campus right now. Once we got rid of the anti-Zionism, I'm at Binghamton University right now. Yeah, although it could be coming back soon. I became a pro-Israel activist because it was kind of an accident. Okay, so in my senior year of college, I decided to sign up to use the kosher kitchen at the Hillel because I was tired of surprise pork in all of my dishes, and I'm like, kosher is pretty close to halal. But then at the club fair, I accidentally signed up for the Israel committee instead of the kosher kitchen. So, oops. And the lady who ran it was this, Israeli lady right out of the army, and I couldn't say no to her. So I joined the Israel committee. But the fact that I suddenly had people giving me different points of view and hearing, different things started opening my mind. And I was like, wait a minute, what if everything I had been taught was wrong? And it was. So, eventually I opened my mind and I decided, I took some Israel learning classes, through different programs. And, I became a Zionist. And sometimes you just need more pro-Israel voices out there. You need to be proactive about it. You can't just wait for something to happen and then be like, wait, no, that's wrong. You have to be out there and being like, I'm a Zionist, I'm proud. Get there before the anti-Semites do. When freshmen come into school, before their minds could be poisoned, you gotta get there first. So, it's, a lot of people, they don't start out as anti-Semites, but anti-Semitism works its way in there because anti-Zionism has a lot of anti-Semitism just in there. So, yeah.
So what I would say about this topic, having worked in the administration with the anti-Semitism definition that the State Department adopted, what I described, the 3 Ds: delegitimization, double standard, and demonization. I mean, there is a statement within there that makes clear that it doesn't include criticism of the policies of the government of the State of Israel. And this is the challenge. And I guess I feel like we have, when it comes to criticism of, Israel at its essence, that's where you're shading into anti-Semitism. But I think we have a responsibility in how we use that label as well, right? I mean, that we have to, be careful not to call everything anti-Semitism. That is legitimate criticism of the policies of the State of Israel, where there is obviously plenty of room for rigorous debate among people who are not anti-Semitic. So, I have seen this debate, play out in the very high levels of government, and in fora like this, and. At the end of the day, we have to focus on the issues and, not ourselves retreat into labeling things just, and hoping that, okay, we throw a label on it and then it's okay because we've now labeled it as X, and so we don't have to legitimate it in any way. So it is a very, it's difficult, but I think the point I'm making is we have the responsibility about how we use a label to be sure that we're really using it for that which is anti-Semitic.
Thank you. First, I would love to thank all of you. It was an amazing discussion, and I'm very curious about many topics. First, I would love to tell you that my name is Efrat. I was doing my studies, my MBA in Spain. So I was suffering from a lot of anti-Semics and a lot of issues that are involved. And Asi Azar is one of my friends from high school, so I heard the story from his eyes. And this is why I wanted to ask you. You're amazing, and thank you for being here. And you answered to my question a bit about being here, but I'm still curious, did you went to see his lecture? And another question that I have is, you were mentioning that the people from the Israeli delegation and the LGBTQ, they had to choose. And if you had to choose, what would you pick?
If I had to choose between my LGBT identity and my Zionist identity?
No,
or,
Palestinians.
Or,
I don't know.
What are you asking?
You had to protect your, your political point of view against your personal side, like, all this combination that we have to choose where we are, and gender-wise.
So you're asking what is my most important identity? Or?
Do you ever feel tension between your
Identities.
Oh, yes.
Because we're
Yeah.
talking only about the Jewish side and the Zionist, and I would love to hear, the other point of view, like if this is an issue as well.
On the Muslim side?
Yeah.
I have very few Muslim friends. A lot of my Muslim friends dropped me like a rock when I came out as a Zionist. It's an uphill battle. Because a lot of Muslims, they don't know any better. Again, they're taught Israel is basically Hitler. Like, they don't know they don't know any better. And I tried to, say differently. They're like, well, you're a shill. You're just, you're brainwashed. How much did they pay you? And I'm like, I've never been paid for my articles ever, but, I wish they'd pay me. But where's all this Zionist money I've heard about? But it's, I get a lot of hate from, I get a lot of hate from Muslims because I'm a Zionist, and I get a lot of hate from Jews and non-Muslims because I'm a Muslim. From the Zionist community, I get a lot of hate because I'm a Muslim. So, there's just a lot going on. Ty brought me. Yeah, or an acquaintance. But yeah, so I wanted to come because I really am passionate about this. I'm queer, I'm Zionist, and I really, really want people to care and include everybody in the LGBT community. It shouldn't, you shouldn't have the Dyke March kicking out people because they're Zionists. That's stupid. Okay.
Can I add something about it? The same way, this gathering, this title of LGBT Jews is also something that we're talking about it like it's something that is, it's okay, there's no problem with that, but we are dealing with this. Like, LGBTQ people are struggling for their spaces and for their rights within the Jewish community. And you see that in Israel, especially because in Israel, who's the biggest opponents against LGBTQ rights? It's the ultra-Orthodox parties within the government. So this entire cooperation, this entire thing that we're kind of saying that it goes together, it's kind of making ourselves believe that it goes together and hoping that it goes together. And I'm hoping, actually, I kind of admit that this event is part of this, as showing these two, I don't want to call it two groups because, as I said, I don't feel that my identities collide, and I'm gay and Jewish. But maybe it goes to show to all of us that when they come for us, they come for all of us. So we should keep our communities together and not against each other.
If I just may add one thing to that, I find it particularly heinous that the LGBT community has an anti-Semitism problem, because you cannot spend your life and everything demanding rights and turn around and discriminate against people. It's just, can they not see the hypocrisy? We have to show it to them and make them realize it, and it's unacceptable, and we can't take it sitting down.
Thank you. So we have time for one more question, and I'm not the one who has to choose. Oh, okay, we have time for two.
Oh, well, thank you.
The chosen one.
So I wanted to follow up on what Matt was talking about with labels, because we live now at a time that we all witnessed the incredible power of branding, starting from crooked this, little that, and going through reshaping the meaning of what fake news means, for instance. And even you mentioned pinkwashing, and now Zionism. And by the way, Ty, when you introduced Zionism as social justice movement and saying, we should think about Zionism as pluralistic, but actually it's a social justice music, Echad Ha'am, for instance, would disagree with you. He never thought about it as a social justice movement. People like myself also don't think about it as, people who still believe in Echad Ha'am's ideas of cultural Zionism don't think about it as necessary social justice movement, just to say that there are more facets to Zionism than it shows. So in nowadays, in this day and age of the importance of branding, I was hoping to hear something about potential creative solutions. What might the creative solutions be within, there's so many creative, interesting people around here on the panel. What are some of the solutions? And I kept hearing this, sorry for saying I'm coming outside from this whole discourse. I don't know what intersectionality is, but I was curious to hear what are some of the creative propositions that you guys may have, and what can we do? Because I spent a few years in the academia here in this country, and as somebody who is Israeli, who used to be in academia on campuses, I saw the activities at Hillel's, and I saw how Hillel was attracting on a campus I was involved with several universities in Boston, with tremendous Israeli communities, and not a single Israeli showed up to all these heavily publicized Hillel events. It was only for these American kids. So without any relationship to a LGBT issue. So, and what I witnessed is the lack of creativity of shaping this discourse of how, so I'm interested to know whether there are any creative ideas, new words, or something we could do to reshape this discourse.
Ty, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Matt.
Sure. Thank you for the question.
You don't have to.
So I think that, first of all, the most important thing is that we need to expand this conversation beyond the Jewish community. And we talk about intersectionality, and one reason I think that we've fallen short is that we try to engage a lot of different communities on our issue, and then we fail to help them in their time of need on their issue. We're sort of building a one-way street, right? Let me tell you why you should be pro-Israel, why you should support Israel. But there isn't the same thing of us as a community saying, well, what does your community need from us? How can we walk hand in hand together? And so I think that the LGBT cause is a great model for us to start building relationships with another community, the broader LGBT community. First of all, there's plenty of Jewish champions in our LGBT community. Edie Windsor is a great example, Evan Wolfson, Roberta Kaplan. Those are in New York alone, right? But we need to make sure that we are visible and that we are engaged on a grassroots level, a grass tops level, all over the LGBT community. And so with our organization, we bring the LGBT and Jewish and pro-Israel communities together to work for each other's causes, because we think that that's the best way to win friends and allies. And you look at the Democratic Party, I'm assuming most people may lean that direction in this crowd. The Democratic Party wins elections in coalitions when their coalitions can get on the same page. That's what the left generally in the US does to win elections. And we have to be able to disagree sometimes with other folks in our coalitions to win. And so we don't need to agree with our friends 100% of the time. But if we can get them to agree with us 60, 70, 80% of the time, we're in a pretty good position. And so it's about reaching out not only to the LGBT community, but to other communities that are at risk of BDS and delegitimization, and ask not what they can do for us, I'm sounding like JFK, but what we can do for them. That's our long-term bet.
UPS as well.
What can Brown do for you?
Oh, I know.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think there is a need to identify more creative ideas. I mean, one thing that I think would help is identifying strong validators, right, to who are both, progressive and have credibility within progressive circles, but who also can, explain why, it's not inconsistent to be progressive or pro-LGBT and pro-Israel or Zionist. I was fortunate to work for a president who said he was a Zionist and certainly was progressive and was also pro-LGBT, and I think he was a powerful validator. Who, frankly, I think the organized American Jewish community, some in the organized American Jewish community really passed up an opportunity to embrace him as more of a validator, and instead were focused on all this other stuff that really didn't reflect who he was and what he believed. Because he actually, is in his heart of hearts, when it came to Israel, a Zionist and understands, the experience of Israel and strongly supported it. And the fact that many in our community questioned that really squandered an opportunity to have somebody who could have been a much better, stronger validator than he was, because we didn't ask him. So.
This question is directed at Matt. It seems that so many of the most vocal anti-Zionist, anti-Israel people tend to come from the progressive side, the very left, very liberal side. And how do you think is the best way to address that? You were working in the Obama administration, and certainly you must have come across that often.
I see. That's the thing. I mean, when it came to the Washington and the administration and the White House, it wasn't that at all. You had basically from the top, a president who was strongly supportive of the U.S.-Israel relationship, who did more to support Israel's security than any other president, in history, including, funding the Iron Dome. And, so there always felt to me like there was this big disconnect between kind of official Washington progressive leadership in the Democratic Party and the White House and in the Congress, and what's going on college campuses and out in the community more broadly. And, I think that the challenge, now is to somehow bridge that divide. And, part of the challenge, at least from my perspective politically, is the effort of some to, appropriate the issue of Israel, support for Israel as, the purview of one side of the political spectrum or another, right? I mean, that, to the extent that there are those who would want, support for Israel to be firmly lodged within, the Republican Party or the right wing, that certainly isn't helping, right, to ensure, support across the spectrum and bipartisan support. And I remember one very prominent, Israeli journalist saying to me once that he was very fearful of the fact that, he was observing support for Israel becoming increasingly this, issue of, the right wing, basically that it was becoming the purview of the right wing, and he felt that that would be a disaster for Israel. And that was happening both in Israel and in this country, and that's something that needs to be, resisted and countered.
I just want to say one thing, and then we can close. It's also a good thing to say for the end. I want to refer to your question about what can be done. And this event is one of the first steps of what can be done. And while it seems like the focus in this event is on us, it's not. It's on all of you. And all of you have heard us saying a lot of things here, make a lot of arguments that I would urge you all to go back to your homes, Google whatever we said, fact check us, whatever, challenge our views, and go and conduct those discussions with your friends, with your family, with everyone you know, especially with those people that you know that don't agree with you. Don't be afraid of those conversations, and start breaking this concept that being pro-Israel is anti-Palestinian. Start breaking those concepts that LGBTQ can't be Jewish, or can't be pro-Israel, or can't be Zionist. Start breaking this concept that Zionism is fascism or Nazism. Think for yourself, promote that. Don't shy away from this conversation. Ideas spread around, and you have a very important part in all of this. So just want to end at that.
Well, I couldn't say it better myself, and I will not try. But that wraps our event tonight. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out. I want to thank all of our panelists, of course. I want to thank Matt for the beautiful speech. I want to thank the World Jewish Congress and A Wider Bridge. And I hope to see all of you and more at a similar event like this in the future. And in the meantime, take the advice that was just sagely given. Talk to your friends, be brave, be bold, and have the conversation, because if we don't make it happen, nobody will. Thank you.